Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another Growth Support Conversation. My name is Neal, and today I'm joined by Jamey Lutz to talk about the unique experiences that we can create in support and how there's danger in creating the same experience across the board as you be able to build it, and a lot of things that play into that. Before we dive into that, though, Jamey, you want to introduce yourself?
I would be glad to. And first off, Neal, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan. I had a chance to listen and watch multiple episodes and just love the work that you're doing. And I know it's having a big impact on your audience. So thank you so much for that.
I appreciate that.
Just a quick kind of introduction. Jamey Lutz. I live in Alpharetta, Georgia, in the Atlanta area, and have been in, as you and I talked about in the pre-show, have been in kind of the customer experience, employee engagement, organizational culture space my whole career, with companies from hospitality to banking to professional sports, training, and most recently healthcare. But most recently started my own consultancy that really focuses on that intersection between customer experience, employee engagement, and organizational culture. So again, really happy to be here today and look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I'm curious because when we were talking briefly beforehand around certain topics and things, we talked about, the danger of sameness. And that's the phrase that you use when you talk about some of the things in terms of topics and what we're going into. I'm curious if you can expand on that phrasing and what you mean by that, just to give people some context.
Absolutely. And as much as I'd like to take credit for the term, the term is actually better sameness. And it's not something that I came up with, but actually a friend of mine that's been in the consulting customer experience space for a lot of years as well. But when you think about customer service improvement initiatives, often those initiatives are really about kind of incremental, small changes, and those are obviously important. Those certainly have a place as well. So those small changes might be adding an additional full-time equivalent to help, if you're in a hotel, help greet people as they come in the door. Or if you're in a banking situation, it might be adding an additional teller to speed up the time for folks that are coming through the drive-through trying to cash checks. Those things are really important, but my philosophy is if we only focus on kind of better sameness and improving the processes and the systems that are already there, then in many cases, we're just trying to keep up with the Joneses from a business perspective of what our competitors are doing. It's not necessarily creating high levels of differentiation, both within and outside of our industry. So I think it's really important to focus on kind of this future back thinking. So instead of just present forward of let's make incremental improvements to our existing kind of service platform, let's really think ahead about what could truly differentiated experience look like. So a couple of scenarios that I think all of us would be familiar with is the Uber experience. Obviously, Uber was the first to get into that kind of shared driving experience. And who would have thought that someone would enter the market and not own any taxis or any cars, but would absolutely revolutionize the way that people traveled when they're not traveling, when they're not driving their own vehicles. Another one would be Netflix. Netflix obviously has transformed itself a couple of times, moving beyond better sameness from the DVDs that we used to order in the mail and then send them back to completely streaming. And they really created what I call signature experiences that revolutionized their industry and frankly, any industry that has experienced kind of how they create beyond better sameness for their customers. So I think there's a real there's a real impetus or a real importance of not just focusing on how can we tweak and make these small changes. Those are important, but if we're only doing that, chances are the competition is going to pass us up shortly. So we really need to be thinking about what could the future look like, and then work back from that and create signature experiences that are going to really amaze and wow our customers, not only within our industries, but potentially cross industries.
I love the way that that's framed in terms of, yeah, we really want to make sure that what we are doing and how we deliver service, we can do that better and more effectively and more efficiently. It's still important, running smooth operations, but also looking much more towards the future of, while we deliver this experience, what is it that we can do? I'm curious, you mentioned a couple of what's Uber, Netflix, these kinds of organizations who have come in and kind of disrupted industries in that sense. How far between do you think these kinds of industry focuses are? Because we talk about, these are much larger organizational changes that disrupt the long-term market. Whereas somebody who's leading a team in the day, how can they get that frame of thinking started?
Yeah. And I think another mistake that we tend to make as organizations or consultancies or whatever the case may be is we focus on what we think is differentiated. We do that, we leave the most important voice out of the scenario, and that's the voice of the customer. So, first and foremost, I think we need to understand what exactly our customers are experiencing when they use our product or service. And the things that we think might be differentiated may be differentiated, but they may not make any difference to the customers. So I think we have to be really active, and not just through traditional means of, reviewing Google reviews or surveys. Those are extremely important and have their place, but you're not really sparking customers to think about, how could this experience look different? Like, what would it look like if it helped you achieve what you're trying to achieve as a customer? And so getting that voice of the patient or customer, whatever industry you happen to be from, is really, really critical. And then taking that feedback and working collaboratively with customers to begin to experiment and try those experiences in a, what I would recommend, kind of a laboratory setting, of a confined setting where you're not rolling it out to the entire organization, but you're going through a period of experimentation to try out those new experiences, signature experiences. You continue to evolve over time and perfect and continue to get feedback from your customers. And then ultimately, if things go well and you begin to achieve the business outcomes that you set out from the beginning, then you can look to leverage that and deploy it across parts or the entire organization.
And I think you hit the most important part, which is understand your customers and listen to them in terms of what are their actual needs. I think a lot of times people get caught up in, oh yeah, we're delivering service today, this is how we run our product or service. But if you keep putting in the same inputs, you're going to generally get the same output. In
the definition of insanity, right?
Exactly. So I think a lot of times it's also, is the way that we're delivering service today the right way to deliver it? Or is there anything that we could do to better serve, the needs of our customers? And do we actually understand the needs of our customers in that sense, where then we can start to think about those solutions better? And you also touched on a small point, which is how when you actually see those business outcomes that you're driving, then you can start to roll it out larger. When somebody is starting to make a lot of these experimental changes and saying, hey, we want to experiment with delivering it this way, what do you think is the best way to bridge the organizational priorities and outcomes with the experiments that they're going to be running?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Neal. And I think I would say, and I'll explain what I mean by this, is we would move from right to left instead of left to right. So kind of the traditional mode would be, hey, let's figure out some small incremental changes that we could make that we think would be of value to the client, and let's create those experiences in such a way that we think it might drive desired business outcomes, such as profitability or growth, additional share wallet, those types of things. So we kind of start with the experiences that we think might make a change. But what I highly recommend and have worked with other companies on is, let's start, instead of the left going to the right, where left is incremental changes, hope that we change the behaviors of our customers, meaning they tell more people about us, they buy more, they keep coming back. We hope that drives business outcomes. Let's start with the business outcomes, the organizational outcomes that we would hope ultimately are impacted, and then work our way kind of backwards. So we'll start with the outcomes. Well, if you're in the grocery store business, you want folks to buy more and come back more frequently. How would we do that? And we would start with, well, what outcomes do we want to achieve? To what level do we want them to refer and to come back and to purchase more? We identify those, and then we create kind of, well, what behaviors would we need our customers to make in order to achieve that? What would make them want to come back? What would make them want to refer? And then we create those kind of differentiated experiences that would drive it. So instead of kind of the left to right, we're starting from right to left. And the great thing about that is, we're not just hoping and wishing that the changes that we make are going to have an ultimate impact on business outcomes. We're starting with those business outcomes and then creating the behavioral change and the experiences that will hopefully bring that to fruition.
I feel like the person who put the compulsion buys right next to the checkout in grocery stores did exactly this.
Right.
How can we sell just that much more?
It's the impact of, you see that soft drink or you see that candy bar sitting there. Now that's a one, from a compulsion perspective, is probably the best thing. But if we truly believe in what it is that we're selling or the services that we're providing, then our customers should benefit from it in some way. And so it's almost, it's almost the wrong thing to do to not make sure that they're aware of the benefits and value of the products and services. So.
Yeah, I think if you're hiding things, or like at least not making them aware of everything that there is, they're probably missing out on a lot as well. I know that I see this in my own product and experience that we're building, is discoverability of features that they didn't even know existed were a huge eye opener to them. And we were like, it was here the whole time for you. Like we would love for it.
Yeah.
So raising awareness and raising the actual, like, what are the tools that I have to leverage as a customer?
Yeah.
And being able to actually help them in a better way.
Yeah. And one thing that I've always believed in is, if the customers aren't truly aware of what value you're bringing to them, then you are kind of underselling, what it is that you're trying to achieve on their behalf. And you certainly don't get psychological credit for them receiving a benefit that perhaps they didn't even know that they were receiving. And so it's really important that they're aware of, however or whatever it is we're doing, that it's somehow improving their life in some way. And we're doing them a misfavor if we're not making them aware of that from the outset.
Yeah, I think you see this a lot of times, and also at the front lines, when you see reps recommending additional services or something that's highlighting that it could benefit the customer in that sense as well. You kind of see this in action on a frontline basis. When you talk about an organizational level and better sameness, we talk about industry disrupting things, really being able to service customers a lot more uniquely to the business priorities and outcomes. I'm curious where the balance lies between actually delivering on industry best practices and keeping that experience moving in the way that the industry is, versus experimenting with these kinds of things that are different or outside of the norm.
I think that's a good question. And I think a lot of that is situational and it depends on the organization. But I think it's really, really important that you have this kind of continuous cycle of experimentation going on, you know, a laboratory setting. So if you've got multiple brick and mortar stores, are you experimenting all the time with, again, the voice of the customer in terms of what are ways that we could be innovative here and perhaps partner with our customers to create a better way? And they'll tell you too, they'll tell you, I don't see any value in what you're trying to do here. Or, yeah, I see value, but have you thought about maybe tweaking it this way or this way? From my perspective as a customer, I think I would prefer that.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're an organization that's not continuously trying to innovate and try new things, again, always with the customer kind of first and foremost in your mind, then chances are you're going to get left behind by others that are thinking in that way. So I think this kind of mindset of innovation, particularly today in our crazy changing, you know, world that we live in, particularly from a technology perspective, that if we're not innovating, then chances are we're losing, or we're in the process of losing. So I think you know, the small incremental changes are really, really important, and we want to continue to do those. But we also want to be thinking ahead in terms of what does the future look like in a year or 3 years or 5 years, and working towards that. Because what we don't want to do is kind of slowly build our way to irrelevancy. We want to make sure that we're listening to our customers and even prompting them, because they may not even have any concept of what is possible. So I think we've got to constantly be, you know, listening to them, but also nudging them and kind of collaborating with them on what things could look like at some point in the future.
Yeah, and that change also takes time, as you're experimenting with things and you introduce something new to your customers, it also takes time to get used to them and see what that actual change is driving, where customers are like, whoa, this is totally different from your experience. This is totally different from what we're used to. So
Yes.
that change management is also really important. You had mentioned really listening to your customers, really getting that feedback. And one of the things is that frontline side of things is really where those interactions happen. Whether that's, you know, you do something within your brick and mortar store, you have people on the ground and on the floor who are being able to help those customers. I used to be one of those people working in retail telecom. So you really do hear a lot of feedback and a lot of information directly from customers. How would you say it's good for an organization to be able to build the culture around, hey, the customer told you this thing on the floor, how can we try and get that information up? Because those conversations happen in person. Those conversations happen quite differently than maybe a digital experience where you have the data, you have tagged interactions and all of this.
Yeah, and I think you and I were talking a little bit about this beforehand, is there is this kind of natural kind of stitching between employees and the customer experience. And if we as middle or senior managers are trying to determine what our customers are experiencing on our own without feedback and input from the folks that are on the front line and making it happen every day, then we're fooling ourselves. And it's a recipe for significant failure in terms of what we're aiming to do for our customers and what we actually achieve. And so from a employee perspective, I found that employees on the front lines love to have their voice heard too. They love opportunities to share what they're hearing and seeing as it relates to the experience that's being provided for their customers. And so I think it's incumbent upon leaders to constantly be asking for and seeking that feedback from our frontline people, because we don't, you know, as you were saying before, most of us in the CX business started out on the front lines, and we know what it's like. Most of us have been in a negative experience where we have felt that our voice wasn't being heard. that we had a lot of insights on the customer experience and no one was listening. And if we're fortunate enough, we've also been on the other end of the spectrum where management leadership did listen to our voice vis-a-vis the customer. And so I think involving employees and even providing opportunities for them to share great ideas or personal experiences around what's working and what's not working with our customers is absolutely essential. And so, you know, there are a few things that people enjoy more than for their feedback to be asked for. And I think constantly asking for that from our employees is really important. Now, just like you and I and anyone in senior leadership positions are going to have bad ideas. Our frontline folks are going to have bad ideas too, but they will also have some, oh my gosh, that's never thought about that. That's an amazing way of us better collaborating with our customers. Never thought about that. So I think it's good for the employees to feel like their voice is heard, but it's also good for the business outcomes that we see, because no one has a closer view and a better understanding than those that are on the front line,
who are actually fully talking to those customers as well.
Yeah.
I love what you say. Like, getting that involvement is really, really important just from all levels of the organization. One of the things that you said early on in that piece was, hey, like, if you're a senior leader or a management team trying to make customer decisions without actually involving the people who are actually talking to your customers, you're going to make some missed decisions and miss out on a lot of opportunities probably to see some of those creative solutions, or maybe that next innovative solution from someone who wouldn't normally be in the room to have those conversations, where they do experience that pain a lot of the times that your customers feel, and generally will have already thought of a solution as well. Like, hey, I just wish this part was a little bit better. We could try this out. Maybe if somebody listened to me, we could make it happen. I think that is a really important feedback loop to have closed when you talk about that as well.
Great. Yep, I couldn't agree more. I think, and you can even formalize it too, Neal. I mean, you can. Lots of organizations, when I worked with the Ritz-Carlton, there was an expectation and a process in place for sharing great ideas. And often those were great ideas from the front line about how to enhance the experience, you know? And so you can formalize that and you can celebrate it. I would encourage folks that are working in those capacities where they have frontline people under them, that they are constantly looking for ways to bubble that up and to recognize and reward people for ideas, even if they're not necessarily deployed or put into practice, that we're at least recognizing them for their willingness to share and constantly kind of keep us up to speed on what our customers are going through.
Yeah, I think that lack of recognition, in that sense, and if you never deploy anything that they do and you just continue to, move forward without recognizing that feedback at all, you also lose that voice at some point where they say, oh yeah, I've given that feedback a lot and nobody's done anything or said anything about it, so maybe I won't give it next time. I think it's an important piece to have in there as well, as even if you don't move forward with deploying ideas like you mentioned, it's still important to recognize that effort that people are putting in to try and make that better experience.
That's exactly right. Yep, I couldn't agree more.
You have actually as well, I'm curious to understand a little bit more. You have your book, Pathway to Purpose, and you talk about organizational culture and change. I'm curious a little bit more about what's covered in that, and if there's any insights we can continue to gain from that outside of this conversation.
Yeah, so the book, I wrote it about 3 years ago. It's of course on the Amazon and other major retailers, but it's the subtitle is it's Pathway to Purpose: Big Ideas for Fueling Irresistible Corporate Cultures. And again, going back to kind of the employee and the customer piece, organizations that are able to create environments where employees find it to be unleavable. They can't imagine not working there, and their customers find it irresistible. that is the epitome of designing for business outcomes that are highly desirable for the organization. From employees that rarely, if ever, leave, and they feel that their voice is being heard, like we talked about before, so they're sharing great ideas. We're providing platforms for them to continue to grow and develop. If I'm in a situation like that where I feel like my voice matters and that that the company cares about me and wants me to continue to grow, then chances are, and statistics would back it up, I'm going to go out of my way to provide a great customer service. And I think sometimes we expect the opposite to happen, is folks that hate their jobs, that are unhappy with their roles within their company, the expectation that they're going to go out and provide great customer service. Some can probably separate it and do that, but the reality is, if you create an environment where your employees are thrilled to be there, they're going to do a great job, and they're going to create customer experiences that are driving those business outcomes that we all desire. So it's kind of this it's kind of this really highly critical synergy between employee and ultimately the customer that is so critical. And so that's really what the book is about, is what are some strategies and techniques that we can use to make sure that we're providing great environments for our employees where they're going to want to stay and tell others about it, and therefore create those types of environments where our customers feel that culture and are going to continue to come back and tell others, and become ultimately customers for life.
I love that intersection, because ultimately what you mentioned, it's, yeah, if you create that really good experience, people will want to advocate and want to be able to deliver that really great experience. Whereas on the flip side, you also mentioned, hey, people who, if you don't create that environment, they're not going to have probably the mindsets or energy to separate the two, and then you're going to have somebody who's putting on a fake energy or a smile, and they're just going to burn themselves out, and ultimately that's not good for the business or the customer. Or on the worse end of it, you also have people who just completely check out in that sense, and be able to create the environment that you want to build advocates internally so that they will also deliver the service that you want to advocate for as well. Is huge.
Yeah, and I think we're all consumers, right? We're all customers of products and services, and it's hard to fake that. If the employee is not engaged with the company that they're working for, even with their best efforts, it's not going to generally translate into a customer service that is unique and differentiated and desirable. So they really are kind of hand in glove when you think about it that way.
Yeah, indeed. I have one more question for you, and I really appreciate you joining me and sharing your experience on these topics, and really going through how to not only create that efficiency, but also look for those opportunities where you can be innovative and create that unique experience. My last question for you would be, if there's one thing over the course of your career that you've learned, what is that one thing that you still stick to today?
From a service perspective, Neal?
In a general professional career standpoint. It's life.
Yeah. There's a lot of things. I would say, this is an interesting one, and it gets brought up a lot, but you hear the phrase, which I think is not true, but the customer is always right. And of course, the response to that is, that's true. The customer is not always right, but they are always the customer. But I would add to that and say, in the mind of the customer, they're right. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fighting us or putting up, a level of frustration and anger, wouldn't be projecting that. So I think, when it comes to customer service, we don't always need to think that the customer's right, but we do always need to view them as a person that if we were in their shoes and perhaps frustrated with things that are happening with our company or organization, maybe we wouldn't act as bad as they are, but we may act in ways that we wouldn't be proud of, right? And so I think part of the service mindset is not to take things personally, and to realize that in the mind of the customer, they are right. And our job is to identify and figure out ways that we can let them know that, hey, I'm here with you. I empathize with you. I understand. And while I can't necessarily fix things exactly the way that you would want me to, I am here to listen. And I am going to do everything that I possibly can to turn this around and create an environment where you feel heard and can envision yourself coming back to in the future. So I think, again, reinforcing the fact that customer's not always right, but the customer does believe they're right. And it's our job to finesse that in such a way that they feel like, you know what, they didn't exactly resolve that. They didn't give me all my money back, or they didn't give me everything I asked for. But I stepped away from that, realizing that person actually cared. And I think the more we can do that organizationally, whether it's on the front lines or whether you're the CEO, talking to a customer that's disgruntled, that catches you as you're leaving for the night or whatever the case may be, there is an opportunity to create much greater loyalty than if the problem had never occurred before, if we simply listen and demonstrate empathy and care and concern.
I absolutely love all of that. I think I just got out of a conversation just like maybe not even an hour ago, and they said the customer isn't always right, but they always have the right to be heard. And I think it's a really, really great way to be able to show, like, yeah, what you mentioned. Yeah, they might not always be right, but they do have, they are also a person at the end of the day. And the way that I like to describe it is, we might not necessarily be the one who's causing the situation, but all the things leading up to the situation got us here. And I think being able to empathize with that is a really key part of the service experience.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely agree, Neal.
Well, Jamey, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I really, really appreciate it. Is there some place, if people want to continue the conversation, to connect with you?
Absolutely. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn under Jamey Lutz, JameyLutz. My website is simply jameylutz.com. So please reach out. You can order my book there. Would love to connect with anyone that has an interest in speaking more about some of these topics, or might have a need for some of the services that I provide. But yes, please reach out. And thank you, Neal, for the opportunity and for the audience that you're creating great content for.
I appreciate that. And thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thank you.